some games are just not meant for everyone. These are the games that provide challenging bosses with some even at the level of being called totally broken. Some prime examples are Malenia, Ishin, Slave Knight. These hardcore bosses will take every ounce of skill that you have. Hence, I have made a list of 10 hardest bosses of all time. There are also some bonus mentions at the end. Let's look at the first game on my list. Orphan of Kos, Bloodborne. We are starting out this list with the dark horse of Souls game. Bloodborne is known to be the best from software game, especially by the OG fans. We can all agree that Orphan of Kos is perhaps the only boss which took an intense level of tries even after learning and mastering every skill. Now, the only relief is that you don't have to face this guy if you don't want to view the cutscene or the weapon. Orphan is only available as the final boss in the Hunter's DLC. It's also the best finale. The creators did a great job ending the DLC with such an amazing boss. Now, if we talk about why he's the strongest, then briefly it's only because of the speed and damage of his attacks along with the combinations. Every attack deals a huge chunk of damage which forces the players to be on their toes and not get hit. The speed leaves little room for healing, and rest as your main goal is to continuously dodge and get 1 or 2 strikes. Another peculiar issue is the combos. Orphan actually combines his attacks in a way that it almost becomes impossible to predict what's about to happen. If you get hit by one combo attack, then it's pretty much game over as it will drain your entire health bar. The tricky part is to learn to dodge his attacks as the timing changes. In my opinion, it's one of those fights where you'll need to die several times just to get an understanding of the next attack. Every death will give you an idea about patterns and timings. So, mastering the basic skills and dodging is the ultimate cheat code of this fight. Still, Orphan of Kos is the best fight in terms of boss design and the overall setting. The DLC was worth every penny spent. Armstrong, Metal Gear Rising.
Idiot! You're not ending our plan. You're expanding it. Check the internet lately.
Being a game that's all about slashing your way through waves of enemies while listening to killer background music, none of us expected that the final boss would be this powerful. Armstrong was a big smack in the face by the developers. Now, I'm being honest, the actual game was also somewhat difficult, but the creators went all out on the final boss. They gave the guy a massive health bar in several phases. It almost felt like the difficulty went from easy to hard in an instant. I know some of you have no idea about this game, as Metal Gear Rising is a highly underrated part and kind of a spin-off from the original Metal Gear series. You're basically a robotic ninja tasked with killing enemies and destroying machines. So, normally we all expected that the final boss was going to be another fast-paced battle, kind of like Devil May Cry. However, the overall fight was quite difficult and made me die several times. The boss is massively buffed, and every punch takes a huge chunk of the health bar. You must block every single punch, otherwise, you'll die instantly. Also, the game makes you time your attacks perfectly in order to execute moves, which becomes a pesky task. Now, even if you manage to get through the first phase, the guy rips his shirt and shows nanomachines throughout his body. From that point on, the fight intensifies, and you must focus on not dying. Otherwise, you'll be looking at another restart.
As industry, men will fight for reasons they don't understand. Causes they don't believe in.
Overall, the setting matches the game's design, but gamers were surprised to find a final boss of that level. We all expected it to be another one-on-one battle in a sort of arena-like structure filled with swords and hack-and-slash moments.
And from the ashes a new America will be born! Evolved but unchained! The weak will be purged, and the strongest will thrive!
Sigrun Valkyrie, God of War. This boss was a huge smack in the face. The whole storyline felt completely normal, and no one expected that the final Valkyrie would be super powerful. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is an optional boss. You must defeat all the previous Valkyries to unlock Sigrun. I guess some of you might have missed this one, as you almost faced this boss after finishing the main story. Not gonna lie, Sigrun deserves the #1 spot in terms of difficulty in the entire God of War. I never had that much of an issue with other boss fights, but this one completely shocked me. I can't even remember how many times I died. Briefly, this final Valkyrie is a combination of all the previous ones. She uses every single attack, which makes the fight extremely difficult. I was also having a hard time learning the attack patterns. I can confidently say that it will take you guys a lot of tries to defeat her. Now, one thing that I want to highlight is that not many players talk about this boss, especially because she's an optional one. So, most players skipped her or maybe forgot about her. If only the developers had made her the final boss, then you would have seen her in every single hardest video game bosses list. Though at the same time, I'm glad that Sigrun is an optional boss, as this gives the normal players who just want a balanced experience a sigh of relief. Nevertheless, I highly recommend trying your luck with her. If you have finished the game and somehow skipped her, then try again and let me know in the comments how many tries it took you guys.
Thank you, friends. You have saved the Valkyries.
Vergil, Devil May Cry 5.
That was a long time ago.
As much as I'd love to hear that story, I think it's about time we
Ended this.
Now, I know that some of you may think he's not that tough. However, we can all agree that as the final boss, Vergil still provides a great challenge. Also, the most important things about this fight are the visuals, setting, and the build-up. I mean, for years fans like me were waiting for a decent fight between Dante and Vergil. So, finally, we got a chance to experience such a visually satisfying battle, and it was worth every penny. The developers did a great job providing the players an opportunity to use normal attacks, and even use the demonic form. Honestly, the whole setting and cutscene felt like a tribute to the amazing Devil May Cry series. It's hands down one of the most iconic fights of the series. Now, the key point is that the first section is way more difficult than Nero's. Playing as Dante felt awesome, but at the same time, it was highly insane. Vergil is way too fast and frightening with his sword attacks. I remember that I was mostly keeping my distance before indulging in switching Dante's styles. It's not a spoiler, but some advice. You must switch between different playstyles to be able to attack and survive the bigger attacks. Though incredibly challenging, this is still an extremely fun fight that really feels like a final duel between two rivals who are at their very best in terms of strength.
Well, with an attitude like that, you're never gonna meet your grandkids.
That's enough. Now, don't get in my way.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
I'm not exaggerating here, but it's definitely in my top 5 boss fights of the series. There was so much build-up throughout the installments. We all were waiting for a long time to see what lengths these two characters would go to in terms of strength and vengeance, and it was definitely worth the wait. Nameless King, Dark Souls 3. This one is a highly controversial pick. Some of you will say that Slave Knight or Sister Freed is a perfect choice, but there's just something visually amazing about this fight. Being a game that is all about navigating dark areas and fighting strong bosses, I think that Nameless King gives a whole other feeling. Just by taking a first look at the boss, you get really overwhelmed as he looks so awesome. Also, the dragon makes a huge difference. It adds depth and difficulty to the main boss. Both phases are quite hard, with the first being tough because of the camera focus issue and the attack patterns of the dragon. However, once you get used to it and learn the move sets, it feels so satisfying to take out big chunks of health by dealing damage to the dragon's head. The developers did a great job telling the players that the fight is going to be epic and insane. They chose a pretty amazing view and the perfect boss design to make the us feel overpowered. Loki, everything kind of points out to what's about to come. Now, Phase 2 is where he earns himself the title of King. His powerful attacks and his quick sidestep are a deadly combo. The entire battle shifts course to mostly dodging and quick strikes. You can't afford to make a single mistake and must not get greedy. Otherwise, it'll be a barrage of aerial strikes and lightning that will kill you in seconds. You could say that this fight is like Sekiro's final boss Ashim. Just like that, Nameless King tests all your skills that you have learned so far throughout the game. Nevertheless, this is for sure one of the best fights in the series. Dark Souls 3 does have some pretty unique bosses. Laxasia the Complete, Lies of P. Now, I know that probably Nameless Puppet deserves a mention here. However, I thought really hard and finally settled on Laxasia. Here's the deal, for me, both fights proved to be challenging, but I can say that it was much easier to learn Puppet's attack patterns. The fight was mostly fast-paced and filled with quick attacks, but it definitely felt easier after a few tries. Now, Laxasia is completely different. Both phases really pissed me off. I managed to get through the first phase, but had a hard time fighting her in the second one. Sure, some of you will say that the second phase is mostly about dodging or parrying her lightning attacks, but somehow I was just having a hard time. Also, you must destroy her shield in the first phase, otherwise she almost becomes unbeatable. I guess the developers went all out in this fight. Honestly, Lies of P is one of the best Souls-like games. It's quite different from the other ones in terms of the story, which in my opinion is the best feature. Yeah, sure, it's a controversial pick, but I felt that the game is quite easier compared to Sekiro and Elden Ring. Maybe because it's not my first time playing it and I have beaten every Souls game. Anyhow, Laxasia is hands down the hardest boss in the game. She is a massive soldier who shoots limitless lightning bolts at you. The only way to avoid them is to master the precise timing for a perfect block. There is not much deep backstory about her. She was mostly like those in-game moments where the final boss kinda says, "Here's my best creation, defeat her first before fighting me." Nevertheless, she still serves a challenging fight.
Oh, Simon.
General Raam, Gears of War. Alright, let's dive into the chaos that is General Raam from Gears of War. If you've ever played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This guy is the ultimate pain in the neck, a real nightmare that just won't let up. So, picture this. You're cruising through Gears of War, taking cover, popping out to shoot, feeling like a total badass. Then boom, you get to the final boss, General Raam. Now, this dude doesn't play by the same rules as everyone else. While you're trying to strategically take cover and time your shots, Raam just bulldozes through everything with zero chill. He's the last obstacle standing between Delta Squad and their temporary victory over the Locust Horde. And believe me, he makes you work for it. Many players will tell you he's one of the hardest bosses in the entire game. Why? Because of his damn krill. These nasty little bat-like creatures make Raam invincible for parts of the fight. Yeah, you heard that right. Invincible. So, while you're frantically trying to shoot him, he's just laughing behind his nasty krill shield and mowing you down with his heavy machine gun. And don't even get me started on those tiny, pathetic safe zones. You have to stick to these ridiculously small lighted areas, where the krills will tear you to shreds. It's like playing a deadly game of hopscotch. Raam's durability is off the charts, and he loves flushing you out of cover, making him one tough cookie. But here's the kicker. Despite all his toughness, Raam isn't that smart. With the right prep, you can take him down a peg. Stock up on explosives before the fight, and you can scatter his precious krills. Once those creepy bats are out of the way, Raam becomes a sitting duck. You can tear through him like he's nothing. It's almost funny how quickly he goes from invincible to helpless. So yeah, General Raam is a colossal pain and a fitting final challenge, but with a little strategy and a lot of explosives, you can show him who's the boss. Maneater, Demon Souls. The only reason I wanted to add this boss is to give this underrated Souls game some exposure. Demon Souls is still a great game, but fairly underrated. Whenever someone talks about Souls games, it's always Dark Souls or Elden Ring. On some level, we all ignore the greatness of Demon Souls. Now, I agree that it's certainly not the best one, and would definitely be at the last spot among the best Souls games. However, it's still one of the best replicas, or so-called inspired by Dark Souls. Hence, no matter what, I had to mention the strongest boss from this game. Loki. The name itself sounds really cool. Maneater is perhaps in the top 5 fights from the game. You'll be facing 2 enemies at once, kind of like the original Dark Souls. These 2 enemies will attack almost at the same time, which leaves you with no option but to dodge and wait for an opening to strike. Certainly, the best decision is to defeat one enemy, but that itself is quite a challenge. You can't solely focus on a single enemy and must deal damage to both. Also, we can't forget about the ultimate boss of the Souls game, which is none other than fall damage. You must avoid falling off the arena, otherwise, all that effort will go to waste. So, the overall fight is packed with 2 enemies with strong attacks and a lot of dodging while avoiding the death screen from fall damage. Now, I would also like to mention Flame Lurker and Old Hero. Those 2 bosses are fairly difficult, but I just had a hard time defeating Maneater. Malenia, Elden Ring.
I am Malenia, Blade of Mikola.
What can I say? We all knew this was coming. No one can make a hardest boss list without mentioning Malenia. Some say that she's mostly hyped and is not that difficult, but I believe that she provides a great challenge assuming you're not using overpowered weapons. Malenia is surely not that difficult if you're cheesing your way through with powerful weapons or did an intense level of grinding. Despite this, we can all agree that most of us had a hard time defeating her. Those fast-paced attacks felt like a barrage of swords, and the second phase is a game changer.
Wait.
One of the most important features that developers added to the game is that they made Malenia an optional boss. Imagine how things would have gone if you had to face her as a final boss after beating your way through 16 main bosses. I guess the creators gave us a chance to get some relief. They somehow told us that if you want to make the game more hardcore, then why not test your luck with this optional boss? The overall fight feels like anime as you will be parrying and dodging her attacks continuously. The battle could also be broken as Malenia almost seems undefeatable. They added her solely for a challenging purpose. Even the pro players had a tough time beating her. I can't even begin to count how many times I died. In the end, it's a hard take. But Malenia is the one boss that a lot of players will never face and probably skip. She's just way too strong, guys. Surely, you can get some level of satisfaction by cheesing her, but in a balanced one-on-one fight, it gets really frustrating.
And my blood rotted. Corpse after corpse left in my wake. As I await.
Before I reveal my final pick, here are some bonus games for you. Ishin was one of the #1 strongest bosses before Elden Ring came out. The guy is just on a whole other level. You need to learn a lot of attack patterns. In every phase he uses different attacks and weapons. Also, we can't forget that you need to face Genichiro before having a shot at Ishin. The perfect definition is that you need to master all your abilities, as Ishin tests your every skill. Now, another one is Maraka, who feels completely broken. Even though by now you must get used to the misleading recommended levels for the missions, the difficulty gets real in this fight. You must watch out for his ice attacks, and that large health bar is just way out of league. In my opinion, the Neo sequel has the toughest bosses, and it gets so hard to choose which one comes out on top. So, I just went with the most suitable pick. You will face the guy 2 times throughout the game, and trust me, the second encounter is quite frustrating. The summoning of Revenant and the high damage attacks change the entire course of the battle. Demon of Hatred, Sekiro. Just the thought of this guy and the multiple health bars is enough to give chills. Sekiro is known for its powerful bosses. Most players couldn't even get past the horse guy. However, this optional boss is no joke. Demon of Hatred is on an extreme level. You must learn new skills and adapt to new strategies. You could say that the developers wanted players to learn something new towards the end of the game. Almost every skill you have learned prior to this fight becomes less effective as the move sets and attack strategies are totally different. Even though the guy is optional, it's funny, but I never knew that this boss existed when I first finished the game in 2019. It was when I played the game for the second time that I realized I must defeat this demon as well. Also, I will not spoil it for you guys, but there's a really touching and slightly sad backstory of this boss. I found out who Demon of Hatred actually is last month. This real identity made me realize how much thought the devs put into creating this boss. The guy shares a similarity with Malenia as both bosses are optional and sort of feel broken. Low-key, you will have to rely on the older Souls game tactics while fighting this demon. The usual Sekiro stuff is not gonna cut it. Your main goal in this fight is to avoid or dodge the attacks, as every attack is lethal and capable of one-shotting your health bar. There's very little room to rest and use flashy attacks. The battle requires you to use your old Dark Souls strategies, running around between his feet and getting a few hits every now and then. Finally, the reason I chose not to add Ishin is that maybe I have seen him get mentioned all the time, and some players are still sleeping on Demon of Hatred. Alright, this finishes our list of the 10 hardest bosses of all time. I know that I have mostly included the famous ones, and probably skipped some from the lesser known old games. However, I had no choice, as there's an audience for all types of games. So, if I skipped the most common ones, there would have been negative comments saying I forgot this or that. Anyways, I would love to make another list, so please comment the names of your favorite hardest boss battles. Also, if you have made it this far, then please subscribe, as I'm close to reaching 15,000 subscribers.